Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're going deep into the world of high finance. We're talking about the Adani Group.
The Adani Group.
Yeah, an Indian conglomerate.
Yeah.
There are some pretty serious accusations of fraud swirling around them.
Oh, wow. Fraud, huh? This sounds juicy. What's the source? Where'd you hear about this?
Our main source is, it's a pretty in-depth report from Hindenburg Research.
Hindenburg. Okay, yeah, I've heard of them. They have a reputation, right, for what was it again?
They're known for their pretty hard-hitting investigative work and for taking a short position against the companies they investigate.
Short position, meaning? Remind me.
It means they're betting against them. Basically, if the company's stock goes down, Hindenburg makes money.
Ah, I see. So they have skin in the game. That definitely adds another layer to this whole thing.
It does. So Hindenburg really goes after the Adani Group in this report. They raise some serious questions about, how they've achieved their growth.
Which has been pretty incredible, hasn't it? I mean, last I checked, Gautam Adani, the guy who runs the show, was like the third richest man on the planet.
Exactly. It's not some small operation. This is a global player.
Yeah.
So when Hindenburg comes out swinging, people listen. One of the big things they focus on is Adani's debt, specifically how they've used it to finance their expansion, especially in infrastructure projects.
Okay, yeah, debt's a big deal in that industry, huge upfront costs. But what's Hindenburg saying about it? They think Adani's in over their heads.
They use the term deeply over-leveraged, which, it's not good. And it's not just Hindenburg who's worried. Credit sites, a pretty respected financial research firm, also raised concerns, although they did soften their stance after meeting with Adani.
Interesting. So there's definitely some skepticism out there. But can you break down the debt thing for me? Why is that so worrying? What does over-leveraged even mean, really?
Well, think of it like this. Let's say you're building a house.
Okay.
But instead of using your savings, you borrow a ton of money to cover the costs.
Got it. Lots of debt.
Right. So on paper, your house looks awesome. But you're also stuck with these massive loan repayments.
I see where you're going with this.
If something goes wrong, interest rates spike, or the economy tanks, you're in trouble. You could lose everything. And that's the risk with companies like Adani. Too much debt can sink them. And it's not just about one company either.
Right. Too much debt in, major corporations can have a domino effect?
Exactly. It can trigger problems for the entire economy.
So we've got the debt thing, which is a bit scary. But Hindenburg doesn't stop there, do they? What else are they alleging?
They go even deeper, suggesting that Adani might be manipulating their stock price.
Oh, hold on. That's serious stuff. Stock manipulation. How?
They claim Adani's using this complex network of offshore funds and shell companies.
Offshore? Shell companies? Oh, okay, now we're talking. This is getting good.
Basically, they say Adani is secretly buying their own stock through these shadowy entities to inflate the share price. It's all about creating an illusion of demand, making it look like more people want to buy their stock than actually do.
Clever, but illegal, right? If it's true.
Very illegal. Hindenburg points to, they highlight a couple of these funds, Mauritius Investment Holdings and Alara Capital PIOC. Both of them have these really opaque ownership structures, and they're pouring money into Adani stocks.
Which is pretty fishy for, supposedly independent funds. They should be diversifying, not betting the farm on one company.
Right, that's the whole point. Yeah. And it's not just speculation either. Hindenburg actually talked to former employees at these funds.
No way. They got insiders to spill the beans. What'd they say?
The former employees described these funds as P-note structures masquerading as funds. I know it sounds complicated.
P-notes. Okay, remind me what those are again.
It stands for participatory notes. They're financial instruments that let investors bet on Indian stocks without, officially registering with the Indian authorities.
Ah, I see. So it's a way to invest anonymously.
Exactly. For some investors, that's totally legitimate, and, they want privacy. But it can also be exploited to hide shady dealings.
So Hindenburg is saying that Adani is using P-notes to create this fake investor base to pump up their stock.
That's the theory.
Wow. He's creating a fake online profile, but for a company.
Yeah.
Making yourself look more popular than you are.
Exactly. And if they're right, this is a major violation of Indian securities regulations.
This is getting more and more intriguing by the minute. So we've got the debt, the potential stock manipulation. Anything else? Or is that the extent of Hindenburg's accusations?
Oh, there's more. You see, this isn't actually the first time the Adani Group has been linked to stock market shenanigans.
Oh, do tell.
Back in the early 2000s, they were involved in a scandal with Gautam Adani.
Gautam Adani. Ringing a bell. Remind me.
He was this notorious Indian stockbroker. He got convicted of market manipulation.
Right. I remember now. Big scandal. Wasn't he banned from the markets or something?
He was. Anyway, SEBI, India's securities regulator, investigated Parekh schemes. And they found that Adani companies were transferring shares to entities controlled by Parekh to artificially inflate stock prices.
No way. So Adani was in on it.
That's what SEBI found. It's like a blast from the past that suddenly feels very relevant.
Wow. So this isn't their first rodeo, huh?
Not at all. And get this, Hindenburg sources suggest that Parekh's network might still be active.
Wait, seriously? But he's banned? How?
That's what they're suggesting. And possibly working with the Adani Group again.
If that's true, that's brazen, like completely ignoring the rules.
Right. So, yeah, we've got debt concerns, possible stock manipulation, a connection to a convicted stock market manipulator. It's getting pretty serious.
To say the least. But what about the family angle? I mean, Adani Group is a family business, right?
Very much so. And Hindenburg dives into that, too. They particularly focus on Gautam Adani's brother, Vinod Adani.
Vinod. Okay. What's his role in all of this?
Hindenburg describes him as a pretty crucial player. They allege that he runs this huge network of offshore shell companies.
There are those shell companies again. What are they doing with them this time?
They're allegedly using them to move money into and out of the Adani empire through what are called related party transactions.
Related party transactions? That sounds suspicious.
It can be. Imagine you and I are running lemonade stands.
Okay, lemonade stands.
We decide to sell each other lemons, but at crazy high prices.
To make it look like we're making more money than we actually are.
Exactly. That's a simplified example of a related party transaction. Regulators watch them closely because they can be used to manipulate financial statements, to make a company look healthier than it is.
So Hindenburg is saying that Adani is using this web of shell companies and Vinod Adani to basically cook the books.
Essentially, yeah. And it's all very opaque. Makes it really hard to know what's actually going on with their finances.
That's never a good sign. Lack of transparency usually means something's being hidden. So we've got the debt, the potential stock manipulation, the Keaton-Parekh connection, and now these questionable related party transactions orchestrated by Gautam Adani's brother. It's a lot.
It is. And the big question is, if Hindenburg is right, how has Adani been getting away with this for so long?
Yeah, that's what I'm wondering. They're a huge company. You'd think someone would have noticed something by now.
Well, about that. Hindenburg claims the Adani Group has a history of facing government investigations. But they also allege something else, something pretty disturbing.
Oh, lay it on me. So they've been investigated before by the government?
Yeah, multiple times, apparently. For all sorts of things, corruption, money laundering. They even suggest Adani might have been skimming taxpayer funds.
Whoa, hold on. Skimming taxpayer funds, that's a whole other level of serious.
It is. And the report puts the total value of these alleged offenses at something like U.S. $17 billion.
$17 billion with a B. That's a lot of zeros.
It is. But here's the thing. If they've been investigated so many times, why haven't we heard more about it?
That's a good point. You'd think something of that scale would have made headlines.
You would. But Hindenburg claims that most of these investigations just disappeared, stalled, dismissed.
Dismissed, even with evidence. That doesn't sound right.
It doesn't, does it? And the report suggests that Adani might be using their influence to silence anyone who tries to speak out against them.
Silence them? How?
Think about it. You're an investigative journalist in India. You start digging into a company like Adani. You find some dirt, evidence of wrongdoing. What happens?
I'm guessing I get a visit from some guys in suits, maybe a strongly worded letter from their lawyers.
Exactly. Or worse.
Yeah, I see your point. Suddenly that big scoop doesn't seem so appealing anymore.
Right. And it's not just journalists. Hindenburg says they've gone after, bloggers, YouTubers, even people posting on social media. Anyone who raises questions about their business practices or, their environmental impact.
Wow. Talk about aggressive. That's pretty heavy-handed.
It is. It gives the impression that they have a lot to hide, wouldn't you say?
Definitely. If they were innocent, you'd think they'd be more open, more transparent, address the concerns head on.
Instead of trying to shut everyone up.
Right. That just makes them look more suspicious.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we've got the potential financial misconduct, the possibility that they're influencing government investigations, and this whole pattern of silencing critics. It's not a good look.
Not at all. But let's shift gears a bit. What does all this mean for investors? For people who have money in Adani or who might be thinking about investing?
That's the big question, isn't it? I mean,
Yeah.
what advice would you give someone who's considering investing in a company like Adani,
Yeah.
especially after reading this report?
Well, first and foremost, I'd say be cautious. Very cautious. Do your homework. Don't just buy into the hype.
Because there's definitely been a lot of hype around Adani. They've been growing rapidly.
Right. But remember, rapid growth can sometimes mask underlying problems. So you've got to dig deeper. Look at their financials, their debt levels, their profitability. See if anything seems off.
Like those related party transactions we were talking about.
Exactly. Those are a big red flag. And look at their corporate governance. How transparent are they? How do they treat their critics?
Those are all good points. And it's not just about Adani either. I think this whole case highlights some of the risks of investing in emerging markets in general.
Oh, absolutely. Emerging markets can be volatile. There's often less regulation, weaker investor protection. So you got to be extra careful.
Do your research. Don't put all your eggs in one basket.
Right. Diversify your investments. Spread the risk. And if something seems too good to be true,
It probably is.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've talked about the potential financial shenanigans, the possible government connections, the silencing of critics. But Hindenburg goes into a lot of detail about specific transactions that they find suspicious. Transactions that they say point to a pattern of deception.
okay, like what? Give me some examples.
Well, they talk about this entity called Scrutiny Trade and Investment, based in Mauritius.
Mauritius.
Right. And it's run by Vinod Adani,
Gautam's brother.
the same. And this entity, Scrutiny, loaned a huge amount of money to a private Adani company called Sunborn. Then Sunborn turned around and loaned a big chunk of that money to Adani Enterprises, which is publicly traded.
Okay, so money's flowing from one Adani entity to another. What's the problem?
The problem is that this initial loan from Scrutiny to Sunborn, it wasn't disclosed as a related party transaction, which is a violation of Indian law.
Ah, so they were trying to hide it, make it look like an arm's length deal when it wasn't.
Exactly. And there are other examples, too, like there's this entity called Carmichael Rail and Port Singapore Holdings, also controlled by Vinod Adani.
Okay, and what did they do?
Well, Hindenburg claims they used this entity to shift losses away from Adani Enterprises.
Shift losses? How?
They transferred assets from Adani Enterprises to Carmichael Rail.
Oh.
And then Carmichael Rail immediately wrote down the value of those assets, taking a huge loss.
So Adani Enterprises got to avoid reporting those losses.
Exactly. It made their financial statements look a lot better than they actually were.
Clever, but shady. So it's like they're using these interconnected entities to move money around and make their financials look prettier than they really are.
That's the gist of it, yeah. And Hindenburg argues that this is a pattern, a systemic problem within the Adani Group.
I mean, related party transactions aren't illegal, but when you have a company like Adani with this complex web of entities and a history of questionable dealings, it does raise red flags.
It does. And then there's the whole issue of the import-export scams.
Import-export scams. What are we talking about here?
Hindenburg alleges that Adani Group companies have been involved in a whole series of scams over the years. Things like over-invoicing power plant equipment, illegally exporting iron ore, manipulating coal prices.
Whoa. That's pretty serious stuff. If true, that's not just financial maneuvering. That's straight-up criminal activity.
Right. And it suggests that their early success might have been built on illegal activities.
And what about those investigations, the ones into these alleged scams? What happened to them?
Hindenburg claims that a lot of them just hit dead ends, stalled, stonewalled, dismissed.
Dismissed again. That's starting to sound like a pattern.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And it raises questions about whether Adani might be using their influence to evade accountability.
Yeah, it's not a good look. It makes you wonder what else they might be getting away with.
Exactly. So we've covered a lot of ground here. We've talked about the potential financial misconduct, the possible government influence, the silencing of critics, and now these import-export scams. It's a lot to digest.
It is. It's a pretty complicated story with a lot of moving parts. And it's not over yet. We're still waiting to see how Adani responds to these allegations.
Right, and what the consequences might be. But beyond the specifics of this case, I think there are some broader implications here, things that all investors should be thinking about.
Oh, for sure. This case raises some important questions about corporate governance, about transparency, about accountability, and not just in India. I think there are lessons here for companies and investors all over the world.
I agree. But before we get into that, I want to go back to something you said earlier about investor caution. What specific advice would you give to someone considering investing in a company like Adani? or any company operating in an emerging market for that matter?
Well, first of all, don't be swayed by hype. Do your research. Look beyond the promises of quick returns and really dig into the company's financials.
What should people be looking for? Any red flags?
Plenty. Pay close attention to their debt levels, their profitability, their cash flow. Look for anything that seems out of whack. And pay close attention to related party transactions. Those can be a sign that something fishy is going on.
Okay, so scrutinize the numbers. What else?
Look at their corporate governance structure. How transparent are they? Do they have a history of ethical behavior? How do they treat their critics? And be aware of the political and regulatory environment in the country where they operate. Emerging markets can be volatile, and companies can be vulnerable to political interference or corruption.
So it's about being extra vigilant.
Yeah.
Not taking anything at face value.
Exactly. Knowledge is power, especially when it comes to investing. The more you know, the better equipped you'll be to make smart decisions and protect your money.
Sound advice.
Yeah.
Now let's zoom out a bit. What are the bigger implications of this whole Adani saga for India's economy? I mean, they've been trying to position themselves as a global economic powerhouse. Could this scandal derail those ambitions?
It could. It definitely could. I mean, this whole thing, it has the potential to really shake things up, not just for Adani, but for the perception of investing in India as a whole.
Yeah, that's what I'm wondering. I mean, India's been on this upward trajectory, attracting a lot of foreign investment. But if these allegations are true, if Adani is really engaging in all this shady stuff,
it could make investors think twice. Especially those big institutional investors, the ones with, the deep pockets.
Right, the pension funds, the sovereign wealth funds, they're not going to risk their money in a place where they think corporate governance is weak or where companies can just, get away with fraud.
And that's what worries me. It's about confidence, investor confidence. If that takes a hit, it could really hurt India's economy.
So, yeah, a potential crisis of confidence. That's a scary thought. But I mean, it's important to remember that these are just allegations at this point.
Right. Adani hasn't been found guilty of anything. They're denying everything. It's possible they'll be able to clear their name.
Let's hope so. But even if they do, even if this whole thing blows over, I think the damage might already be done. I mean, it's raised some serious questions about how business is done in India.
It has. And it's highlighted some systemic issues that need to be addressed, regardless of what happens with Adani.
Like what? What needs to change?
Well, for starters, India needs to strengthen its regulatory framework, make it harder for companies to get away with this kind of stuff.
Right. More oversight, more transparency.
Exactly. And there needs to be better protection for whistleblowers, for people who come forward with evidence of wrongdoing. Right now, it's too risky for them to speak out.
Yeah, they could face retaliation, intimidation, even violence. We saw that with some of the journalists who tried to investigate Adani.
Exactly. So there needs to be a system in place to protect those people, to encourage them to come forward, because without them, it's much harder to expose corruption.
Yeah.
To hold powerful entities accountable.
It's like that old saying, sunlight is the best disinfectant.
Exactly. And that's what's been missing here. Too much secrecy, too much happening in the shadows.
And that brings me to something else that I found really interesting in Hindenburg's report. They point out that despite Adani's size, despite their prominence, they've been largely ignored by major institutional investors.
Really? That's pretty telling.
It is, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, these are the guys with the big brains and the even bigger wallets. They have teams of analysts who scrutinize every investment before they commit billions of dollars. And they've been steering clear of Adani.
Huh. I wonder why.
Well, Hindenburg suggests that it's because they see too many red flags. Too much risk, not enough transparency.
Yeah, that makes sense. These guys, they have a fiduciary duty to their clients. They can't just throw money around recklessly. They got to be careful.
Right. So the fact that they're avoiding Adani, it's a pretty big warning sign. It's like they're saying, hey, there's something fishy here. Be careful.
Yeah, I think that's a message that all investors should pay attention to. Whether you're a big institution or just an individual with a small portfolio, it's always better to err on the side of caution.
Especially when it comes to emerging markets.
Especially then.
So we've talked about the financial implications, the economic risks, but let's not forget about the human cost of all this. I mean, Hindenburg alleges that Adani has been using their power and influence to silence critics, to intimidate journalists, to suppress dissent.
Yeah, that's the part that really bothers me. In a democracy, people should be free to speak out, to criticize powerful entities without fear of reprisal.
Exactly. And when that right is threatened, When people are silenced, it's a problem for everyone.
Yeah.
It undermines the very foundations of a free society.
It does. It creates a climate of fear where people are afraid to speak truth to power, and that's dangerous for everyone.
It is. So I think we've covered a lot of ground today. We've delved into the complex world of the Adani Group, explored the allegations of fraud, the potential implications for India's economy, the broader lessons for investors and citizens alike. It's a story that's still unfolding, and it'll be fascinating to see what happens next.
It will. One thing's for sure, though. This whole saga, it started a much-needed conversation about corporate governance, about transparency, about accountability, and hopefully that conversation will lead to some meaningful changes.
Changes that protect investors, protect the environment, protect our democracies.
Exactly.
Well, on that note, we encourage you, our listeners, to do your own research, draw your own conclusions, and stay informed. Because this deep dive into the Adani Group, it's just the beginning of a much larger conversation. So stay curious, stay engaged, and keep asking those tough questions. Until next time, happy diving.